Imagine this moment. Monday, January 12th, 1987. Wallington, Surrey. The thermometer reads -9.1 degrees at lunchtime, not overnight, not early morning, midday. The lowest daytime temperature Britain had experienced in more than 2 centuries. Big Ben stopped moving. The sea at Southend began to freeze. People left work at 5 in the evening and didn't make it home until sunrise. And no matter how bright the sun shone, nothing changed. The temperature stayed locked below -9 all day long. If you lived through January 1987, you never forget it. Not just the snow, not just the disruption. It was the cold itself, a deep, punishing cold that simply refused to loosen its grip. And January 12th was the worst of them all. It started days earlier, on January 7th. A mass of icy air poured out of Siberia, swept across Scandinavia, and headed straight for Britain. At first, people assumed it would pass. A brief cold snap, maybe some snow, then back to normal. But it didn't pass, it stalled. It settled in, and it stayed. By January 9th, temperatures were falling fast. Snow began to spread across the southeast. This wasn't a light dusting that vanished by lunchtime. This was heavy, persistent snowfall driven by savage easterly winds. By the 11th, parts of Kent, Essex, London, and Surrey were buried beneath 50 centimeters of snow. On the North Downs, depths exceeded 75 centimeters, 2.5 feet, in places that barely saw a couple of inches in most winters. But January 12th rewrote the record books. That Monday morning, people woke hoping the sun would help. Skies were clear, bright blue across southern England, yet the temperature refused to budge. In Wallington, Surrey, it stayed fixed at -9.1 degrees from morning until early evening. From 9 a.m. to 6 p.m., not even a fraction of warmth returned. London recorded -8.3. Large parts of the Midlands hovered between -6 and -8. The highest temperature anywhere on mainland Britain was just 0.1 degrees, recorded at the Butt of Lewis in Scotland. Everywhere else remained frozen solid. It became the coldest daytime temperature of the 20th century. Colder than the Big Freeze of 1963. Colder than the brutal winter of 1947. Breath crystallized in front of your face. Ice formed inside bedroom windows. Hot tea cooled before you finished drinking it. And the sun hung uselessly in the sky, bright but powerless. At Southend-on-Sea, something almost unbelievable happened. The tide rolled in as slush. The sea itself was freezing. People gathered along the shoreline, staring in disbelief as chunks of ice floated in the water. Ice crept along the coast. By the following day, sections of the shoreline had frozen solid. It was the first time since 1963 that the sea froze in the southeast. Photographs showed people standing on ice near the shore. Seagulls perched on frozen waves. The English Channel didn't freeze completely, but close to land, it turned solid enough to walk on, something Britain hadn't seen in nearly a quarter of a century. Herne Bay in Kent saw the same scenes. Ice-locked fishing boats in place. Locals came out to witness something their grandparents had talked about, but they never expected to see themselves. Then Big Ben stopped. Not from snow, like in 1968, from cold. On the morning of January 12th, the famous clock seized up. Extreme temperatures froze the chiming hammer and internal mechanisms. The clock that had ticked through world wars, bombings, and decades of British history finally gave in. Engineers worked for hours to free it. Metal had contracted in the cold. Oil thickened to the consistency of syrup. For much of that Monday, Big Ben stood silent. Commuting turned into chaos. Trains froze to the rails. Diesel fuel turned to jelly. Points locked solid, no matter how much de-icer was applied. And if you tried leaving London that evening, you faced a long, miserable night. A journey from Charing Cross to Ashford, usually 90 minutes, took 13 hours. Passengers left work at 5 p.m. and arrived home at 6 the next morning. Trains crept forward, stopped, waited for frozen points to be cleared by hand, then crept again. People sat in unheated carriages wrapped in coats. Some used newspapers as insulation. Others paced between compartments to keep circulation going. A few had flasks of tea, most just waited, hour after hour. British Rail's reputation took another hit. The wrong type of snow, they joked, but nobody was laughing. This cold broke every system Britain had. At home, daily life became survival. Even houses with central heating struggled. Radiators barely warmed rooms. Boilers ran constantly and still couldn't keep up. Families clustered together, wearing every jumper they owned. Breath fogged the kitchen air. Ice-coated bathroom mirrors. Condensation froze on windows. Getting out of bed required strategy. Clothes laid beneath the duvet overnight. Slippers kept under blankets. The moment your feet touched the floor, the cold hit hard. Some people dressed entirely under the covers. Across the country, pipes burst, toilets froze, taps stopped working. Schools closed not because of snow, but because plumbing failed. Herne Bay Junior School shut for nearly a month. Outside, toilets frozen solid, no running water, no option but to close. Coal deliveries stopped as roads became impassable. Lorries couldn't move. Families burned whatever they could, old newspapers, broken furniture, anything to keep fires going. Coal smoke filled the air on every street, and still the cold didn't ease. January 13th brought fresh snow. Blizzards swept through Kent and Essex. That night, temperatures plunged to -23.3 degrees at Coldest, Rutland, the coldest ever recorded in the East Midlands. Scotland dropped to -16 at Aviemore. Even the southwest stayed well below freezing. Sunshine continued, bright, mocking, useless. Then came the gloom. From January 14th onwards, parts of southern England went 14 straight days without seeing the sun. 2 weeks of grey skies, frozen streets, and no sign of relief. The mental toll was enormous. Cold is bearable when it has an end. But weeks of freezing temperatures combined with darkness drained people. The usual jokes about British weather vanished. Everyone was exhausted, tired of shivering, tired of struggling, tired of waiting for spring. Supermarkets ran short of food. Delivery trucks couldn't get through. Panic buying stripped shelves bare. Bread queues formed before dawn. Petrol stations emptied. Supply chains collapsed. Farmers recorded -19 degrees in places. Livestock froze in fields. Crops were destroyed. And unlike 1963, this freeze arrived with almost no warning. 1 week Britain enjoyed a mild winter start. The next, Siberia had arrived. The Isle of Sheppey was cut off completely. No roads, no trains. RAF helicopters delivered bread, medicine, essentials. Even the Sun newspaper sent a helicopter to report on conditions, only for a local police officer to commandeer it to airlift a woman in labor to hospital. She gave birth safely, possibly the only good news that week. Across Kent, people helped one another. Four-wheel drive owners became heroes. Farmers sheltered stranded motorists. Neighbors who'd barely spoken before shared food and blankets. When infrastructure failed, community stepped in. Schools remained closed for weeks. Children loved it, sledging down Greenwich Park. Snowmen that lasted until February. Skiing along village roads buried beneath drifts. Families walking across hedges and fences, snow so deep you stood feet above ground level. But beneath the fun was hardship. Hospitals filled with hypothermia cases. Elderly people struggled. Doctors trudged through waist-deep snow making house calls. And still the temperatures refused to rise. Finally, around January 20th, the thaw began. Slowly, painfully, temperatures edged above freezing. Roads reappeared. Railways reopened. Britain, battered and exhausted, began to recover. When milk arrived unfrozen for the first time in 2 weeks, people actually cheered. The cold spell of 1987 lasted a fortnight, but January 12th stands alone. The coldest day Britain had seen in over 200 years. The day temperatures stayed below -9 at midday. The day Big Ben froze. The day the sea turned to ice. And nearly 40 years later, nothing has come close. Were you there that January? Drop a comment and share your memory. And please subscribe to keep these stories alive.